Pasuk in Amos, v'osim briach glosayim. I will put a wedge into the glosayim, into the doors. Ksiv osi lo siro no Hashem. Miponai lo sachilu asher samti chol gvul hayom. It's a verse in Yirmiyah. If before me you will not be afraid, I put the sand as a barrier before the ocean. What does this mean? The ocean comes in with tremendous power and it breaks at the seashore. So what is the boundary of the ocean? The sand, which is alongside the seashore, that breaks the ocean. That is the rule. That's the cannot go beyond that boundary. The ocean comes to that point and doesn't go beyond that point. Upo Yoshis Begon Galecha. Verse in Eov. Until that point, the power of the waves will go. Omalo Hayom. The ocean, meaning the angel that was created to oversee the ocean. Ribon Shalom. If the ocean water, which is salty, flows, and the river water, which is sweet, which is not salty, they flow next to one another. The sweet water will intermingle, will be diluted with the ocean water, which is salty, and the river water, the sweet water, will not be potable. You won't be able to drink it. Amalo lav. Each body of water, based on its characteristics, whether it's salty or sweet, it has its own storage location, and they don't intermingle. Although they flow next to one another, they don't intermingle. Shenemar quotes a pasuk in Tilim, no saying botzaros tomos. Hashem has set storage location in the depths of the earth for each source of water. Vim tomar. And maybe like taking a wonderment that all the various types of water don't intermingle with the ocean water. The face, the skull of a person, which is not that large, it's only the size of when you set up a loom. It's not wider than that. The many sources of fluids which exist in the skull. And yet they don't intermingle, although they're all contained within the same system. Tears, the tear ducts in a person's eyes. Meluchim, they're salty. Tears are salty. Meos naim shmenim. The fluid you find in one's ears, which is waxy, or fatty. Mechotam, the liquid in the nose, or sruchim. It's like putrid. Me'apeh mesukim. The saliva is sweet. Why, when Hashem created the human being, why are the tears salty? When a person grieves over a person who dies and he cries continuously, mistama, he'll become blind because the continuous crying will actually damage his eyesight. But because they're salty, salt usually causes something to contract. It doesn't allow the tears to continue to flow. Otherwise, if a person cries to that degree, ultimately it'll diminish one's eyesight. Why is the liquid, the fluid you find in one's ears, why is it fatty? Because when a person hears some type of news which is very difficult to accept, something which is painful, unless it remains contained in the ear and doesn't penetrate to the heart, if it would go into his emotion, the person would die. The heart does not have the capacity to absorb that negative information. Neimahim shmeinim, machlis bozev umotzi bozo. Why are the fluids that are in the sinuses, why are they sruchim? They're putrid. When a person smells something, a very bad smell, because when you inhale that putrid smell, which is like beyond nauseating, beyond mess, it will be, the person will be so overwhelmed by it, the person would die. So the putridness of the fluid that comes from the sinuses dilutes it, does not let it, the person fully appreciate, be affected by the negative smell that he smells. Why is the saliva sweet in one's mouth? Some person eats a food which is not fresh, and the person vomits it out. Unless a person has the natural sweetness in his mouth, he will never forget that negative experience, and anything he eats would always bring back that negative experience he had when he ate that spoiled food, that putrid food. That's one reason why the saliva in the mouth is sweet. Listen to this. Because a person verbalizes and articulates the Torah, and David Melch refers to Torah, when you study the Torah, the words of Torah are sweeter than the sweetest honey. The sweetest honey. So when you verbalize the Torah, and naturally a person is able to relate to the specials of Torah, as you say the words, it causes a sweetness. You articulate it, brings a sweetness to the mouth. And if the mouth, the saliva would have a putrid taste, it would not allow you to fully appreciate the words that you verbalize. Therefore, that's the reason why the saliva is sweet, and it's not something which has similarities to the fluids that come out of the sinuses. The face, which is very small, and all the various sources of fluids that flow are very close to one another. They have many sources of where that liquid, that fluid originates. Hayam HaGodol, so the ocean, which is so vast, Alach Kam Bakamo, Shemabo, Zayam HaGodol, Rechov Yodayim, Shom Remes, Vei Mispor. Mao, what does this mean? Lamdoch, Shkol Dova HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ose Shlichuso. That everything that Hashem creates, it carries out the agency of Hashem exactly as He wanted it. Although each fluid, its source is next to one another, and similarly they should all intermingle, and each one should infringe on the other. But if Hashem gives the order how they have to function, it functions exactly the way Hashem wants them to function. And there's nothing in existence that exists which is for naught. The times that Hashem has even a frog carrying out its agency. Sometimes a flea carries out his agency. Tsira is a type of what they call the tsetse fly that carries this disease or has a certain venom. Or a scorpion. Sometimes even a scorpion carries out the agency of Hashem. Reb Chanan di Tzipori, Rachanan, who comes from Tzipori, there was an incident, there was a scorpion that was going to do God's agency, and it was on the other side of the Jordan. And a scorpion can't swim. So what did Hashem do? He had a frog on one side of the Jordan, and the scorpion hopped a ride on the back of the frog. and the frog carried the scorpion across the Jordan, and there was a person on the other side of the Jordan. The scorpion gets off the back of the frog and bites a person. The person dies from the scorpion bite. So we see that even the akrov, even the scorpion is the agent of God to carry out the shlichus, God's agency, because the person was meant to be bit by a scorpion. So how do you get no scorpions? God will provide the frog to get the scorpion across the river, across the Jordan, to bite the person. There was a person, he was a harvester, and he was putting together sheaves in a certain location in the summertime. So he took a strand of grass and he tied it on his head to cover his head. Okay, similar things. That every events that take place, they take place the way they do because that's the way God dictated they should actually function. Second. So it concludes over here where it says, at the end of time, ultimately, when the day of reckoning will come, when the nation's world will have to be destroyed, it'll come through insects, which are tiny insects. God will call the fly, and these flies will be diseased flies. And they're going to enter, and they're going to bite people, and the people are going to die from these fly bites. So you think you have this or whatever. I remember, when I used to travel every morning from Muncie, it was so advanced, was so sophisticated that all of a sudden one night there's on the news, there's black ice on the highway going from Rockland to New York City. And there's no way, as much as they salt the roads are shut down. The highway's shut, you can't drive. What are you talking about? We're so sophisticated. But yet, if the temperature drops below a certain degree and there's some slight water on the road, you can't drive. You're incapacitated. So what does it take to incapacitate a person? It was the COVID virus. What is it? All of a sudden, people are dying like flies throughout the world, whatever it is. At the end of time, when Hashem, there'll be a day of reckoning, just as when we went to Eretz Yisrael, Hashem sent this tzira, this certain type of insect, which actually emitted a venom and went into the eyes of the Canaanim when they were hiding, and they became blinded, they died from it. At the end of time, that's the way Hashem is going to destroy the nations of the world. Okay? Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron saying, Zos chukas haTorah. This is the ultimate statute of the Torah. Hashetziva Hashem leimor, which Hashem commanded, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to bnei Yisrael, v'yikvei lecha pora aduma tamima. Take for yourselves a red heifer, which is completely red, asher ein bo mum, which is not blemished, asher lo oleol, and there was no yoke put on this animal. When it says yoke, doesn't mean a yoke necessarily. The Gemara tells us, the Mishnah tells us, that if a person that has a parah aduma, has the red heifer, and he takes his walking stick, and he just puts it on the animal, that the animal should carry his walking stick, or he takes off his jacket and he puts it on the animal is already invalidated. It cannot be used for the paraduma. That's lo aleol. Okay, let's see Rashi. So Schukas Torah. This is the ultimate statute of the Torah. We speak about very often the Torah goes and classifies the laws of the Torah as either mishpatim. Mishpatim means rational laws, edus, testaments, or chukim, or statutes. For instance, one should not steal, one should not damage. Ownership rights. These are mishpatim. So, as Rashi says from Chazal, that even if the Torah wouldn't have stated these laws, based on a rational level, we understand that if you want to have a society, people have to respect one another's ownership rights. People have ownership. Therefore, you have no right to take something which is not yours. And if you damage your fellow's possession, there's liability. There's an obligation of restitution. That's mishpat. Edus are what? Testaments. Shabbos is a testament that God created the world. Pesach is edus that God took us out of Egypt. Therefore, the various things that we have over there. Dietary laws, shatnez, that you're not permitted to wear a combination of wool and linen in one garment. These are statutes. Paraduma is a statute. It's the ultimate statute. Because we find over here, as we'll discuss, that the only type of contamination which one cannot be relieved from by going to the mikveh or a natural wellspring is the contamination of the dead. Every other contamination, you immerse yourself at a certain point, you're relieved of that level of contamination. But the contamination of the dead, unless you undergo the paraduma process, which we discussed in this parsha, you're not relieved of that contamination. And that's the reason why all of us, until the coming of Mashiach, we're all contaminated, because it's inevitable that sometime in our lifetime, we came upon something which we came in contact either with the dead, or we were under the same roof with a corpse, or let's say there was a corpse was in a location and there was anything metal in that location, in that residence or whatever it is, was exposed to that contamination, and you go there, you're contaminated. Even though Kohen's permitted to go, it doesn't make a difference. He's still contaminated. Because we can see the Torah says, anything made of metal, if it's exposed to a corpse, it assumes the identical status of the corpse, which is called avi avos atum. It's the ultimate level of contamination, and therefore you become contaminated. The only way we can be relieved is contamination. The next paraduma that's going to be made is when Mashiach comes, Moshe Rabbeinu will be there, and that's going to be his paraduma. And we'll see there were so many paradumas throughout history, and there was always some ash left. Every paraduma that was made going forward had some of that original paraduma, which was the paraduma of Moshe Rabbeinu. And when Mashiach comes, the paraduma, which will be found, that red heifer, and they undergo this procedure, it will have some of that original ash of the original paraduma intermingled in it, and therefore it'll be able to relieve us of the contamination of the dead, and therefore be able to bring the Korban Pesach at the time of the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash for that reason. So this is the ultimate. Why is it the ultimate? Because we find it contaminates the pure and it purifies the contaminated. Those who engage in it at certain points, at certain junctures. Why does Torah say Zos Chukas HaTorah? This is the ultimate statute. The Satan the Satan and the nations of the world, they mock us. Monin is Israel. They criticize us. They deprecate us. Lomar ma mitzvahos. You Jews, you have commandments that don't make any sense. They're totally irrational. They're even contradictory. Umatam yeshva. There's no way to understand it rationally. Leficha kozba chuka. Therefore, the Torah says chuka. Zos chukas haTorah. Gzerim lefonai. It's my decree. And because once you know it's my decree, as much as you try to understand what it is, you have no right even to try to understand it. Because whatever you come upon, it's definitely incorrect. It's an incorrect understanding. So don't even try to understand it. I'll give you an example. The mission tells us in Chagigo that a person is not even permitted to try to delve what existed pre-existence. Existence is ex nihilo. What existed before that moment? Whatever you're going to say, it's incorrect. Why? Is it possible for a human being to understand infinite? Can't understand the infinite, because even the greatest angel, which has unlimited capacity, he's still finite. The finite cannot understand the infinite. The only thing that existed before existence was Hashem. Ex nihilo, what was, how do you take something, there's nothing, and he wills it should become something. You make something from nothing, and nothing, even nothing, is not what we understand nothing is, which is a vacuum. Nothing is something which is something that doesn't exist. And we can't even fathom or visualize what it means not to exist. Because the only thing that existed pre-existence was Hashem himself. Therefore, that's something you're not even permitted to try to think about or try to figure out, because whatever you come up with, it's incorrect. Because it's an area which is not within the context of a human being or anybody's capacity to try to relate to what that was. For instance, there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, the world to come, it says, could you understand or even try to figure out or have a sense of what the world to come is? I mean, the Gemara describes what it is. That the mission tells us in Pirkei Avos that a koras ruach of olam haba, that even a whiff of whatever it is, the pleasure, all the pleasures of the world encapsulated to one moment, is not even the equivalent of a whiff of the world to come, pleasure-wise. What's pleasure? Do we know what pleasure is? Everything we sense and we process is within the physical context. What is it? So the pasuk says, there's no human eye that saw what that is. Only God himself knows what that is. I mean, until you arrive there, you have no idea what it is. If you're a soul, a spiritual being, then you have relevance to you can understand what that is. But until you go there, we can describe what it is. There's nothing comparable to it or whatever it is. But to relate to what it is, you have no understand what that is. It's a different realm of existence, which we can't relate to that realm of existence, which is a spiritual existence, which is a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Gemara says in Brochos, Tzadikim Yoshim Nitzrasem B'Rasheim, the Tzadikim, they sit with the crowns on their heads, and they benefit from the radiance of God. Being in his presence, you benefit from radiance based on your own spiritual capacity. What is that? There's nothing comparable to that at any level. So we can explain it based on the Masorah, comparing it to the physical. But what is it? There's no way to understand what it is. We find there's a famous Orach Chaim HaKodesh regarding Bikurim, which he explains it on an illusionary basis. The Kohen will take the tenah. Tenah, numerically, it means the basket. Will take the basket of the new fruits, the new grains that you bring for the Bikurim. He will take it from your hands. Based on an illusionary level, he explains it. It's referring to when a person passes away, and it's in the Daf Yomi, the Gemara says, Ashrei mi shebolav the Talmud biyado. Fortune is the one, when you come to the world to come, you have the Talmud biyado. You have the whole Shas. You have all the Torah already learned, and it's committed to your memory. So when you come there, there'll be a malach that will be designated to take the 60 tractates that you studied, that you committed to memory, he will take it from you. And then it says, V'samachtem chalatov, and you rejoice with all the good. So he explains over there, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, we say, P'kudei Hashem Yisharim B'samchei Leiv. The dictates of Hashem are Yisharim, they're straight, and it brings joy to the heart. So he writes over there that if a person would truly relate to the innate joy of Torah, you would lose your mind. We don't have a capacity to be able to internalize that joy. It's only because of our physicality and all the distractions we have because of our being embedded in the mundane, in the earthiness, we not able to fully absorb what that essence is, because if you would actually have a meltdown. That's how overwhelming, all-consuming that joy would be. I'll give you an example. You'll hear the most beautiful music, and there's a lot of static, and there's a lot of interference. As much as beautiful as the music may be, the static and interference doesn't allow you to appreciate the beauty of whatever that music is. Our physicality does not allow us to fully absorb and internalize the essence of what Torah is. It brings joy to the heart. The joy is such joy, it's not, we don't have a capacity even to contain that joy. It's the same idea. Only Olam Haba, the world to come, only God knows. No eye has ever seen it. Only God himself knows what it is. As much as we're deprecated and mocked by the nations of the world, we have always continued whispering in our ears that it doesn't make sense, it doesn't add up. You just have to ignore it. What is the basis? Why is it this way? As you don't understand God, you will not understand this. It's my decree, and you have no right. You're not even permitted to question or try to figure out what it's all about. What about all the criticisms, all the whisperings? Just push it out of your mind. Just ignore it. Because whatever you say, even though you may explain it to them and convince them, but that's not the correct understanding. Those chukas Torah, you would believe that it's within our capacity to understand. And therefore, if we don't understand, it becomes a problem. Because if we're broached with the question, it seems to be irrational. You have no understanding of what you're doing. Just the blind groping in the dark, we feel minimized, compromised. So Hashem tells you up front, the reason why you don't understand it, it's not because you're lacking your capacity. It has nothing to do with your capacity of intellectualism or your profoundness of understanding. It has nothing to do with it. It's something which is not understandable. Once that is, it doesn't reflect poorly on us. I'll give you an example. Every day we pray for Parnasa. Amida, a person goes and you take appropriate initiative to earn a living, and you don't succeed. And you've been trying for years, and you can't make ends meet. And you do everything honestly, and you truly do your due diligence, and you have the education, you have all what you need, and you don't succeed. So bottom line, what's the answer? If success is determined by the person himself, it's your prowess, it's your ability, it's your acumen, it's your intellect, it's your charisma, then you know something, you failed. So therefore, what does it do? It reflects badly on you. Immediately, the person ultimately will have some kind of inferior complex. He feels inferior. Everybody succeeds, he doesn't succeed. But if you understand that everything we have, it's because Hashem determines it. Because that one's yearly stipend is designated for the year. And as the Gemara says recently in Bava Basra, just as your earnings are designated, your losses are also pre-designated. If that's the case, I'm doing my best. I'm acting responsibly within the law. The reason why it is this way, that's the way Hashem wants it. One person's born poor, one person's born rich. One person's born with advanced IQ, another person is born with an average IQ. Do you feel inferior because you have an average IQ? You don't. I'm this way because that's where Hashem determined I should be this way. There's a Gemara in Tainis that there was a Tana, he felt that day he felt like euphoria. He was so involved in learning that he experienced this feeling of ecstasy, and he meets a man, and he never saw such an ugly person in his life. Never saw such an ugly person. And he says to the person, I think it was Ben Azai, and he says to the person, he says, I've never seen anybody as ugly as you in my life. In a state of ecstasy, feeling that he's flying high because of his experience of Torah, he says he's never seen anybody as ugly as this person in his life. So the person says to this Tana, he says, why don't you go speak to the potter? Go speak to the potter. He made me, that's why I'm the way I am. And the moment he said it to the Tana, it was literally, he was like shaken he was awakened to understand how inappropriate his comment was. Go to the potter and ask him why he made such a vessel. What are you asking me why I'm ugly? If God created me this way, that's the way God wanted it to be. So right away he realized he did something terrible, and he begged him for forgiveness. Begged him for forgiveness. Would not forgive him. Would not forgive him. Although it wasn't public. It wasn't a public embarrassment. He pursued him. He walked after him miles and continuously asked him, forgive me, forgive me. Finally, they went into a city, and the Chachomim of that city see him begging for forgiveness. The man's not willing to forgive. So they say to this ugly person, for our sake, forgive him. Because since he is a Talmud Chacham and he's this great Torah sage, unfortunately made a mistake, but forgive him. As long as he's committed never ever to make this mistake again. And he forgave him. So Gemara says, it turned out this was Eliyahu Navi, and he came to test him. And he came, and that was his answer. His answer was, what are you asking me why I'm ugly? Ask the potter. You're born with an average IQ. Do you feel inferior? You're born with a severe IQ. Do you have a right to feel pompous and arrogant because you're more than the next one? You only have it because God, it's all God given. It has nothing to do with you. But it doesn't make sense. It makes sense. We don't understand because God says it's beyond human capacity to be able to. So it doesn't reflect on us. It's not a shortcoming in us. We don't understand because we have an irrational law. No, it's very rational. If you'd understand how special it is and why it has to be the way it is. So it all goes back to bitochen. It goes back to what we believe and what we trust. It's a person goes to the rabbi and says, I respect dietary laws, but Rabbi, could you explain it to me? Rabbi says it's a statute. Can't explain it. He says, but I feel that if I can't understand it, it's difficult for me to keep it. So the rabbi says to this person, I made this up myself. By the way, do you understand Einstein's theory of relativity? He says, I don't have that kind of IQ. I never went to MIT. I never went to Princeton. So Einstein's theory of relativity, you don't understand. But you want to understand God's mind. When he said it's a statute, that's you want to understand. And if you don't, you have difficulty keeping it. You understand? So what it's all about? It's purely arrogance. If you don't understand, what do you mean you don't understand? Don't you understand? You're a speck on the spectrum in terms of what you understand. We speak about we say every morning and after the Birchas HaShachar, Kol HaGibor Kain Lefanecha. A person who has intelligence, like he's born without brains. You have no understanding. Versus Hashem. It doesn't reflect badly on you or poorly on you. It's my decree. You have no right even to try to delve into it. So it doesn't reflect badly on you because it's something that you're not supposed to understand. You're just supposed to accept it because it's my statute. It's my decree. That's the understanding. Good. Jay, here's the question.
Rabbi, why is every mitzvah in the Torah then not a chok?
Okay. The Torah classifies the mitzvahs as mishpatim, as I said earlier. Edus, mishpatim, edus, and chukim. Factually speaking, why you're not permitted to steal is because the way we process why you're not permitted to steal, as I said initially, because you can't have a society, a functional society, if people don't respect one another's ownership rights. Therefore, you have to have certain things in place. Otherwise, you can't exist as a community, as a society. Otherwise, it's survival of the fittest. That's what happens. As it says in Pirkei Avos, if not for fear of government, people would swallow one another alive to that degree. So you can only have certain protocols in place only because there's law and order. If not for that, it would be possible to survive. So why don't you steal? Because you can't have a society. That's the way we process it. In the absolute, it's because there's something about stealing, which is the antithesis, and it does not allow our spirituality to develop, and it undermines our spirituality. But if the Torah is classified as mishpatim, means based on your capacity, you have within the rational, you have a way to process it, to relate to it. It's wrong, it's unethical, it's immoral. You can relate to it. And then when the Torah says chukim, you can't even relate to it. The Torah is telling you areas which you could relate to, areas you can't relate to it. But once the Torah puts the label on it, it's mishpatim, even if it would not be for God's dictate, as a rational human being, you should be able to put it in order to appreciate how wrong it is. So there you fail almost on two levels. You fail because as a rational human being, you shouldn't have done it, besides being my dictate. But in its essence, everything's a chok. It directly relates to our spirituality. The Gemara says in Bava Metzia, if a person goes and undermines another person's livelihood, it's like you took his soul. But that's only for a Jew, not for a non-Jew. But if it's the equivalent of taking his soul, why is it only the Jew? Why is not the non-Jew? If stealing, killing, murder, there's no difference. That's one of the no-hide laws. But there's things embarrassing a person. It says a person embarrasses another person. It's the equivalent of taking his life if he turns colors a number of times. There are many things. The non-Jew. But if it's rational, it's rational only if you have that level of sophistication, we could relate to it. In essence, it's a chok, it's a statute. Because based on our dimension of spirituality, certain things are a total infringement and they diminish our spirituality if we go there. Why? Because if you don't understand the makeup of our souls and you understand the background of what that represents, you don't understand it. We don't understand it. But you could understand it rationally. But that's not the reason. There are many things we don't understand. Kashrus, dietary laws. There, the nations of the world say it doesn't make sense. Ritual slaughter. If you slaughter a certain way, then you could eat the meat, if not, not. That's not one of the things that the Satan whispers in their ear. Or certain things which are chukim. It's something very specific. It's things which are actually contradictory, which the Midrash is going to say. There are 4 areas which were actually deprecated because of them, which we say it doesn't make any sense. See, like very often, when I've been teaching many years, and people began learning Gemara, they would say to me, Rabbi, it doesn't make any sense. I said, it makes sense. You don't understand. With time, you'll understand. Here, as much as you learn, there are issues which are not understandable. Okay? And this is the Medrash. The 4 areas with which the evil inclination comes and responds to us. And Torah says chukah, now, what's the halacha? We have incestuous relationships. If a man, his brother marries a woman and divorces her, is he permitted to marry his brother's divorcee? It's an incestuous relationship. It carries the liability of kores. If a child is conceived, it's a mamzer. You're not permitted. But yet, if that same brother And if the brother dies and he has children, he's not permitted to marry the widow of his brother. And the same thing, it's incestuous relation. What happens if his brother dies childless? And they're related through the paternal side. They share a common father. Not only is it permitted for him to marry the widow, he's obligated to perpetuate the name of the deceased. So the question is this: if that union brings about such a level of destruction, it undermines our spirituality, that it carries the liability of kores, and it causes a child to be considered illegitimate, how is it possible that if there's no child and she's a widow, not a divorcee, not only is it permitted, it's a mitzvah. The child is a kosher Jew. And if we be a Kohen, he could be a Kohen Gadol, the child of that union. It doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. It's not we don't understand. If it's wrong, it should be wrong in every application. Because innately, if it brings about that level of undermining and destruction of spirituality, how in this context was it permitted? It's contradictory. That's one example. Kilayim. What does the Torah say? You're not permitted to wear a combination of wool and linen. But yet, if you have a linen garment, 4 corners, the Torah says you have to put tcheles on the tzitzis, and tcheles can only be applied to wool and tzitzis, to wool. But if you take those wool strings and you tie them into the corners of that 4-cornered garment, which is made of linen, what are you creating? You're creating shatnez. It's a combination of wool and linen. So the question again is this: if that combination is detrimental to our spirituality, why within the context of tzitzis is it permitted? So there's an inner contradiction in the law itself. That's the problem. It's not that we don't understand. Sar mishtaleach, Paraduma. Eshetzav tichsiv ervis ochichol of segaler. Torah says you're not permitted to engage with the wife of your brother. Meis below bonim. But if he dies childless, then there's a mitzvah that the surviving brother should perform levirate marriage. And it says over there, you must keep my chukim mishpotai, kilayim nechsiv lo sil b'shatnis. Torah says you're not permitted to wear a combination of wool and linen. Sodim b'tzitzis muter, but yet if you have a garment made of linen and you put tzitz muter, uchsiv bo chuka. It says chukah over there again. Es ukosai tishmu behem techolo sabia kalayim. Ubegit kalayim. Sar mishtalech. What's sar mishtalech? That's the goat that's thrown down the mountainside, which atones for all the sins of the Jewish people. The one who takes that animal out into the desert, he becomes contaminated, similar to paraduma. But yet, when that animal is dismembered, when it goes down that mountainside, the Jewish people are purified. So what contaminates the one who takes it out, when it goes down that mountainside, it brings about the ultimate level of spiritual purification. And it says by Sar Mishtaleach, by the goat that's thrown down the mountainside. Again, the Torah emphasized this is a chukah. Whoever's involved in the process to bring about the end result of paraduma, the tam begodim. Not only they contaminate, the clothing they're wearing are also contaminated. The gufa metares begodim, the garb becomes contaminated with the dead. You sprinkle the ash with the water on that garment and follow the process, it becomes purified. This is the ultimate statute. So we speak about we're deprecated, or we feel like fools. It's not something we don't understand. Many things we don't understand. What do you have 4 chambers in your heart? What do you have 5 fingers in each hand? Because that's the way God created a human being. There are many things we don't understand, but here it is the inner contradiction in the law itself. Because if it is one, how is it permitted? Like people say to Rabbi, whenever you want to say it's permitted, it's permitted. Whenever you want to say it's not permitted, it's not permitted. You're just pulling the wool over our eyes. No, if you would understand, you'd understand. I'm not saying when it's not permitted, it's not permitted. You must understand why. And there it's really based on knowledge. However, here, it's built into the law itself, there is an inner contradiction. Despite that, it's a chukah. That is the statute. To be continued.